Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to be following my honourable friend, the member for North Durham, and I want to begin just by echoing the appeal that he's just made for support for local charities and community organisations on whom we are going to be very dependent over the next few weeks and who we need to survive the challenges that they are facing with the loss of funding and loss of bookings and so on in the period ahead. But I want to also warmly welcome the package of employment support that the government announced last week and the commitment to pay up to 80% of the wage costs of those employees who are furloughed and the other support that was in that package. And I welcome the fact that it came forward quickly. It was just a week after the budget. It was a huge package that was put together in a very short period of time. I congratulate those who were responsible for that. And I must say, over the week that's followed, I think the package has stood up quite well to the scrutiny that it's been subject to. And I think the government and those involved can take credit for that. Like others, I think it's a shame that we still don't know what is going to be done for self-employed people. And it's particularly regrettable that we're not going to know before the House rises, and so members are not going to be able to scrutinise that package when it is unveiled. But inevitably, we do need to talk about the position that self-employed people are going to find themselves in over the next few weeks. And whatever is in that package tomorrow or the following day, I've no idea what's going to be in it. I think it is clear that universal credit is going to have to carry a fair amount of the strain in supporting people through the period ahead. And so it's about universal credit that I want to speak this afternoon, picking up some of the points made by the honourable member for Glasgow South West, who was at the meeting of the Select Committee on Work and Pensions, which I chaired this morning. He's referred to the very large number of people who've applied for universal credit, 470,000 since Tuesday of last week, 105,000 yesterday, and it is a good thing that so far the systems have not collapsed, and that's something we can be thankful for. Like others, I've seen screenshots saying to people, you are now in the queue. Due to the incredible volume of new users, there's a queue. Number of users in the queue ahead of you is 79,129. Your estimated wait time is more than an hour. Well, indeed it is more than an hour, quite a lot more than an hour. But I think it's right just to pay tribute to all those in the Department for Work and Pensions who are working very hard to deliver much needed, urgently needed support over this period. And I'm grateful to the Permanent Secretary at the Department of Work and Pensions for offering this morning to give the Select Committee weekly updates on how things are going, because it's clearly very important that once people do apply for universal credit, they get the help they're entitled to quickly, because people are going to need urgent help. Those like the self-employed constituents we've heard about whose business disappeared last week, they need help urgently. Yes, I'd gladly give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an incredibly important point about universal credit. And also, would he agree with me, that this system, universal credit, has been in design for years, and it was designed, supposedly, we were told, to be agile and adaptable and scalable. Is this not absolute confirmation that the system cannot be effectively scaled? And will he agree with me that universal credit needs to be scrapped and a system put in place which actually works?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and we took evidence on this very point this morning about the need to improve universal credit, to change some of the problems, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, in universal credit. And unfortunately, we were told that because of the IT systems, there's very little that can be done in the short term. For example, one thing the government has already agreed to do is to reduce the maximum deduction from people's standard payment of universal credit, and they have deductions in order to pay back the advance, for example, that people can receive up front, and other deductions as well. I think there's a case for suspending those deductions for the time being, but that isn't the government's intention at the moment. They've agreed that the maximum deduction is going to be reduced from 30% of the standard amount down to 25%, but they're telling us they can't do that until October 2021. Because of the problems with the IT system. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend for reminding the House that years ago we were all told this was going to be done in Agile, precisely in order that changes could be made quickly. And I'm afraid those promises have not been fulfilled. We were assured time after time that all the problems of the old DWP systems were going to be solved by adopting this Agile approach. And sadly, that doesn't seem to be the case. Despite that, I am going to press this afternoon, as I did this morning, and as the committee did this morning, for changes to universal credit. And I think a way just has to be found to overcome some of these problems and get some of these things done much more quickly than is being suggested at the moment is going to be the case. I very much welcome the fact that the headline rate of universal credit and of working tax credit has been increased. It's been increased only for a year, but given the long freeze that we've had in the rates of benefit, I think there is a case for making that increase a permanent one rather than a temporary one. That's something that we will come back to, no doubt, in the months ahead. But in terms of universal credit, providing much-needed support to self-employed, to people who've come off zero-hours contracts, to freelancers, there are some serious problems with the way it works at the moment. The Trussell Trust has found that people on universal credit are 2.5 times more likely to need a food bank than people on the legacy benefits, the people on job seekers allowance, for example. There's a remarkable article in the current issue of Lancet Public Health about universal credit, which finds, and I'm quoting directly from the article in this month's issue, that an additional 63,674 unemployed people will have experienced levels of psychological distress that are clinically significant due to the introduction of universal credit. And it goes on to estimate that over a third of those might reach the diagnostic threshold for depression. Reading from the article a little bit further on, when the policy change was introduced, the prevalence of psychological distress started to increase among those eligible for universal credit. However, the prevalence remained constant for people not affected by the change. And at a last point in this article, we also tested if there was an increase in the number of participants transitioning from unemployment into work in the intervention group after the introduction of universal credit relative to the comparison group. The reform had no effect on employment. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are some really serious problems, I think, with the way universal credit is working, and we are now forcing, and understandably, hundreds of thousands of additional people onto this benefit. What is the problem? Why is it that it causes so much difficulty for people than job seekers allowance and other benefits in the past? Well, a big part of the answer is the fact that you have to wait 5 weeks after applying to receive your first regular benefit payment. And that is pushing people inevitably into debt. They are in debt to the Department of Work and Pensions. A lot of people are then choosing to say, well, in that case, I better not pay my rent for a bit. They're getting into rent arrears. The National Housing Federation is reporting that people on universal credit are significantly more likely to be behind with their rent than people on job seekers allowance, both in the past and currently. And this is going to be a problem that will be affecting very large numbers of those who are now applying for universal credit. And it just seems to me it cannot be a good idea, given the boldness and the generosity and the welcome characteristics of the package for employees introduced last week, to force self-employed people, by contrast, onto an arrangement where they don't actually get a substantive payment for 5 weeks. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend, and would he not agree with me that at this time those individuals on universal credit and on job seekers allowance, many of those individuals are having to go to food banks, but at the very time that we need the support for those food banks, unfortunately many of them are having to close because of the age demographic of the volunteers, as in they're normally a lot more mature, and that's why we need, within this package, more support for those food banks and the charitable sector.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I very much agree about the need for more support for charitable organisations. I spoke yesterday to the Chief Executive of the Trussell Trust, who told me of their 1,250 food banks, 2 have closed so far. One of them is reopening, and the other one they're putting in some other arrangement instead. And I think it is a remarkable tribute to exactly the people that my honourable friend refers to, who are running those food banks, that despite the potential risks to them, they are carrying on. And I think the whole House will be grateful to them for the extraordinary effort that they are making.
Would you accept another intervention on food?
I will.
Thank the honourable member for his making an excellent speech. And would he agree with me that one of the constituency inquiries coming into inboxes at the moment is around the availability of certain food products to elderly people, and even those who don't need to go to a food bank but who are trying to get food from, supermarkets, the things that they actually want are not being fulfilled on their list, and therefore it is creating quite a situation of insecurity of food, whether you have the money, whether you're on universal credit, and in general the supply of food is a really tricky situation, something that DEFRA could probably look into.
I think that's one of quite a number of anxieties that are around at the present time. But I think that what should happen with universal credit is that the advances which are payable to people up front, and about a quarter of those, I think, who've been applying over the last few days have applied for an advance, that those should be converted to grants for the current duration of the current crisis. Now, we were told this morning that it's very difficult to change the IT so that they don't automatically claw back the advances from subsequent payments. But I really cannot believe that even with this extraordinary IT system that appears to be in place, that is beyond the wit of those who are running it to manage. A very simple thing, just don't claim back, don't claw back the advances from subsequent payments, because otherwise people will ask how the government can treat self-employed people so badly by comparison with the package for employees. I also think, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the current savings limit for eligibility for universal credit needs to be lifted if it's going to do the job of supporting self-employed people. At the moment, if you have more than £16,000 in savings, you get nothing at all from universal credit. If you've got more than £6,000 in savings, then the amount you get in universal credit starts to be reduced. And if we're going to support adequately self-employed people over the next few months, that needs to change. I hope as well during this crisis there'll be a long and careful look at the rules around sanctions for universal credit. I'm pleased that the department has, because people are not going to be required to go into job centres for the time being, that's welcome, and I'm glad that's been announced. But I hope the opportunity will be taken to ensure that sanctions therefore won't be applied to people, because they're not going to be required to look for work in the normal way. And the handling of deductions for past debts, tax credit overpayments, that kind of thing. I hope there can be some easements for the terms being operated for those. Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the increase of the local housing allowance back up to the 30th percentile. I hope it will stay at that level so that it can adequately support rent in the future. There is a problem in London of the interaction between that new higher level of the local housing allowance and the separate housing support cap, which means that a lot of renters in London won't be able to benefit from the increase in the local housing allowance. I hope that cap will be addressed. I was disappointed this morning to hear that there isn't going to be any change in the overall benefit cap level, and I think that may well need to be looked at again as things develop over the next few months. And the final point I want to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's been referred to already a number of times in this debate, there's a large group of people in my constituency and many others who are working hard, they're law-abiding, they are permitted to work in the UK, but they don't have indefinite leave to remain, and they don't have recourse to public funds. And that means that if they have to stop working in order to self-isolate, or because their business has collapsed or whatever, as things stand, they will get no help at all. And we do need people in that position to be able to support themselves, because otherwise they'll have no alternative but to carry on working at risk to themselves and to wider public health. So I really would want to end with a plea that the government should, at least temporarily, lift the restriction of no recourse to public funds for those who've got leave to remain but not yet indefinite leave.